I really don't have any evidence at all that Torah enforcers in Galilee killed anybody. I don't think they did have capital rights. We do know that Jewish mercenaries or revolutionaries and so on in Judea, there's no doubt about that. And people could have misunderstood Jesus to be such a popular character. Does not have to be direct influenced by the Jewish authorities. But I don't know to what extent we have evidence that the Jewish authorities on their own had the right of capital punishment. That would have seemed to be a violation of Roman power, where Rome ought to have the power of life and death and not religious groups. If troublemakers were to be killed, Rome would have to do it.
Dr. Dennis MacDonald, there's this guy named Jesus. I don't know, he's like a very famous person. I know. Just finding out about this guy, you know. And he is well known for being crucified. The earliest documents, or if we could date Paul earliest, as most scholars do, say he was crucified. Okay, for me. And I'm working with you here because I'm going to hand the mic and let you roll with it, and then I'll try to have dialogue. But as Paula Fredrickson says, we have Gospels. And I'm like, well, what can we trust from there? And she goes, well, if you can kind of trace something through from the Gospels to Paul, you can maybe anchor it. But without a doubt, let's just say the guy was crucified. That's a given. Okay, he's crucified. We're on the same page. Cool. We're all on the same page. Everybody's happy, right? No, not everybody's happy. Because some people want to say why he was crucified. Well, there was a conspiracy of Jews, certain Jews in the temple that didn't like what he was saying. We see hints of this throughout the Gospels. And that they participate in trying to eliminate this messianic figure, this radical, this social change reformer kind of person who wants to try and snap down on the people who are trying to be law enforcers and greedy people in the temple. You've turned my father's house into a den of thieves, but that's mimetic. So Jews were either involved, or others who take the position, no, Rome did this. It was Rome, and Jews did not have any part in this. You've said in a live stream recently that, yeah, you think that some Jews were actively involved. I want to get your take on what you think killed him. What did he do? Who were the people involved in this killing in your estimation? And why do you do that? Why do you take that position?
This is a very important and delicate topic. And I want to start out by being clear that Roman crucifixion, or the crucifixion, is a Roman way of killing the opposition. And they do so to make an example of the person they are executing, to discourage other people to following that leader or committing the same crimes. And usually the body was left on the cross in order to be desiccated and eaten by birds or animals or whatever, to show the horrors of what it means to violate Rome. But there are lots of different reasons why people were crucified. So the question is not whether Jews crucified Jesus. Of course, Jews did not crucify Jesus. The issue is, what was it in the Judean situation, or larger in the East, including Syria, that was happening that would cause the Romans to find Jesus as a troublemaker? Now, you have some people who would want to say that Jesus himself was a revolutionary, and that the target of his rival kingdom of God was an alternative empire, and the Romans were suspicious about people like that, and they executed him. But take a look at the death of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was killed by Herod who is a functionary of Rome, even though he's Idumean Jewish himself. And it wasn't for being an instigator against Rome, but being too popular among the Jewish people, and being a prophet. So we have in Josephus also a notice about Jesus's brother James and others who were executed because of Annas, the high priest at that Ananias, the priest at that time, because they were violating Jewish law. It's more likely that they were not violating Jewish law so much, because Josephus then says people who were more expert at the law said that their conduct was okay, and that Ananias had to stop persecuting people like that. So Jesus's followers, including his own brother, had a marginal understanding of Jewish law that was not faithful enough, according to some, but was faithful enough according to others. So I haven't talked about the Q document at all. I've talked about the death of John the Baptist and Jesus's brother James. And in both cases, the problem was that they were troublemakers among Jews. So that is what I think happened with Jesus. Again, I want to emphasize it was Romans who crucified Jesus. They are the ones that are ultimately responsible. The issue is, did they feel threatened by Jesus, or did they feel threatened by turmoil among Jews themselves about Torah observance? And that's what I think we find in the Q document. So there are two places where the death of Jesus seems to be anticipated in a way, and potentially of his followers. One has to do with Judea Torah enforcers, and the other has to do with the Jerusalem temple establishment. For the Jewish temple enforcers, Jesus says, do not fear when they bring you before synagogues. Do not fear those who can kill the body. That is, he thinks the Torah enforcers have the power of capital punishment. If you violate Torah because of this proclamation of the kingdom of God and relaxing of Torah observation, they may want to kill you, but they can't kill your soul. So because the Son of Man is going to someday sit as a counselor to the angels who serve as a jury, and those who are his followers will be tried to see if they denied the Son of Man or confessed in him. So I take that passage seriously. Now, you don't have to believe in Q in order to say that that's early material. It appears in Luke earlier than in a version earlier in Luke than in Matthew, but it also appears in Matthew. So I'm not making this up. It's not coming from the mythological layers of the New Testament. It's coming from the Jewish side of the New Testament. So Torah enforcers in the Q document may kill you because you are not observing Torah with the same fidelity. Now that means there's social upheaval in Galilee because of Jesus and his proclamation, according to the Q document. Let's not worry about the historical piece quite yet. The Q document also has woes on Jerusalem. Now, again, you don't have to believe in Q. You can say that these things appear both in Luke and in Matthew. And in my view, the Lucan version is clearly more original. But it goes like this: Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I wanted to gather your children like a hen gathers her chicks, and you would not. And wisdom has sent to you prophets and sages whom you killed. Look, your house now is forsaken, that is the temple. And you will not see me until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And in my view, at that point, the Q document said, I will destroy this temple and build another. Now, that is not going to be welcome news to people in Jerusalem who are responsible for the temple, namely the Sadducees and allied people. And these are the people responsible for the death of Jesus in Mark and in the Synoptics. It's the chief priests, that is, those responsible for the temple cult, who talk Pilate and the crowds into killing Jesus. Now, whether that's historical memory or not is not mine to judge, and I think it's impossible to know. But if Jesus had a threat against the temple, that would not be received well by the temple establishment, and they're the ones that have the ears of the Romans, because some of the chief priests were in fact put in place by Roman authority and so on. So I want to summarize my argument, and then we can talk about it. The Romans killed Jesus. The big issue is why. According to the Q document that finds similarity in the death of John the Baptist and Jesus' brother James and others, it's either violation of Torah, a reassessment of Mosaic law, because Jesus teaches on the Sabbath, he heals on the Sabbath, he allows gleaning on the Sabbath, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath, and so on. That really is radical stuff. And in fact, in both Matthew and Luke, you have a variation of the law and the prophets until John the Baptist. After that, it's the kingdom of God. And there are going to be some in the kingdom of God that don't obey all the commandments. That is radical for Torah enforcers who think that God is not going to rescue them from Roman occupation unless all of Israel is faithful. Now that's more. So those are the hardliners. The other possibility is that the claim that whether Jesus said it or not, it doesn't matter much. If there was a notion that Jesus said he would destroy the temple, that's not going to sit well with the temple establishment in Jerusalem. And we know, are hand in glove with Roman authorities. And so they could have, so in one part of the Q document, the Torah enforcers in Galilee have capital punishment rights. They can kill people who don't obey, fall in line with Torah observance. In Judea, it's going to be a protection of the temple, and either one or both of them could have been the problem. So I don't think the problem was a direct threat of violence against Rome. Rome is too powerful for that. I think they get tired of the turmoil in Israel among Jews that Jesus is a participant in. And if I were to give a model for this, it would be something like Cesar Chavez, where it's social upheaval that causes alienation and danger.
Okay, a couple things. I get from you, it's not either or. It's kind of a both, and you're trying to be fair. You gave a few examples that really, I was like, that's interesting. You point out that it was Jews or Idumeans with Herod and John the Baptist, and it was Jews, chief priests and whatnot in Jerusalem for James. And so here you have both accounts that are not Romans themselves. These are Jews. And this is a question I'm sure you've heard 1,000 times throughout history in your scholarship. Then why didn't Jews just kill Jesus? I mean, they're killing all these other guys. And if we're going to put any blame on them, then why didn't they? Now, I'm with you. I actually follow your argument more. I'm being devil's advocate on purpose here. I follow your argument more because I can't say what is and isn't. I don't even know how to assess Q the way that you do, but I imagine there's voices in there that kind of look like, especially when you see this echoing throughout the Gospels, where there's Jews, and the way they even play it with Pontius Pilate, which I think is very fictive, it's almost like the Jews want to press it, but reluctantly the Romans have to make an example out of him. Come on. So they definitely would have in real history. I'm just curious to what your explanation would be on why didn't the Jews just kill him themselves, since they were willing to do this in every other case? Why would Rome have to get involved in this one and not just throw him off the temple, stone him to death, cut his head off? Why do you have to crucify him, and did they have to get involved? Would you say it's because you really do think that when he died, he was in Jerusalem during a high holy day period? And sure enough, Rome, as far as I know from Steve Mason, in Galilee, there aren't soldiers floating around. The legions are up there until the high holy days. The Romans are actually actively around the city to make sure rioting and things don't happen. What are your thoughts?
Well, let's go back to the Q document. I think the Q author is paranoid about Torah enforcers in Galilee, and he's warning his readers that they need to be stalwart. I really don't have any evidence at all that Torah enforcers in Galilee killed anybody. I don't think they did have capital rights. I think this is paranoia on the part of the author, honestly. I think issues are different in Judea. And we do know that there were problems with people who were Jewish mercenaries or revolutionaries and so on in Judea. There's no doubt about that. And people could have misunderstood Jesus to be such a popular character. It does not have to be direct influence by the Jewish authorities. But I don't know to what extent we have evidence that the Jewish authorities on their own had the right of capital punishment. That would have seemed potentially to be a violation of Roman power, where Rome ought to have the power of life and death and not religious groups. So maybe they didn't have the prerogative of capital punishment, and they would, if troublemakers were to be killed, Rome would have to do it. So those are very good questions. In the case of the again, Torah enforcers in Galilee, I think it's just Q's paranoia and fear that when you take him in front of a synagogue, they'll kill you. Or maybe it's just hyperbole. Even if they were to kill you, they can't do anything with the soul.
Now, I know this is not in the same topic of what I wanted this to be, but I think it's a relevant point. You and me are doing some deep digging in our mind right now and trying to think about this with no real basis of absolute evidence in any way. We're just making the best guess based on the material. But we did a real serious mental exercise right now in front of everybody on camera. Now I want you to hurt your head for a second. Are you ready for this? How much work would you have to work in your head to imagine all of this, the Jewish part of all of this, was completely fictive and made up in order to invent all of this to become a mythicist? I mean, I'm saying that even with me struggling to think about it, because I'm sitting here thinking to myself that for me, I mean, it seems like, how far are you going to go to try and invent when it would have been just much easier in light of other historical characters you just brought up that were really doing similar stuff, or some stuff in a weird eschatological way? The temple, we'll go over here and, we'll find treasure in Samaria and Mount Gerizim. Hey, the Egyptian. Hey, this Judas of Galilean, you name it, like real people doing this. How hard does your head hurt in imagining how much work would have had to go into trying to even invent this? And do you think it even makes sense to try and do it?
Of course, it does not make sense to try to do it. In my view, that's just a preposterous way of understanding how religious movements work, as though they're parasitic of everything around them and they have no originality. And, they're just concocting this in order to create a hero. That's why I think the mythicist position is so truncated in its understanding of Judaism. And the author of the Q document has a particular agenda in making Jesus the new prophet like Moses, with a more compassionate understanding of God's rule, namely the kingdom of God. And yes, there are parallels to Judaism because the author and Jesus were Jewish. That doesn't mean that the narrative is pirated. So a little bit of Hillel here, a little bit of Shammai there, a little bit of wisdom here, as though it's a pastiche or a quilt that's made out of little pieces of debris that are floating around. No, this is a living author who's Jewish, who admires Jesus, and he is, of course, going to have parallels to the Judaism around him, the same way that you and I would have probably cliches that we could bring out of the political discourse or sports or whatever. So I think that is simply a non-starter to think that these things are patched together from various places. Now you have analogies in Judaism. Absolutely you do, because these are Jews. But to think that you create that Jesus out of the debris of various fragments of Jewish lore or whatever, I just find mind-boggling.
And while we still have time, real quick, John Dominic Cross and I asked him, what do you think happened? And he goes, well, I take the narrative here when Caiaphas, and there's certain parts in the Gospels to him that kind of make him think maybe there's a kernel here. For example, I don't know if this is in the queue, you might know, but in one of the later Gospels, I don't think this is in Mark, Matthew or Luke, one of the two, I think. You can help me better than I can. There are times when Caiaphas and them are trying to capture Jesus, but they can't. The crowds literally protect him. And by day, they have his back. So John Dominic Crossan thinks that Jesus is being protected. He's being kind of escorted to do his teachings and stuff during these holy days, where the Roman Empire is there. They're trying to make sure stuff doesn't get out of control because it's the most politically heated time of the year where people are remembering Egypt and being set free of, Rome, technically. And here's Jesus talking about another kingdom, right? So he thinks Caiaphas or somebody that plays a role in the narrative, whether it was him, some Jewish leader, notices that at daytime, they can't get their hands on him because they're afraid of the crowds. But they are watching where he keeps going. In the Gospels, it describes he leaves the temple each day at night, and they go, of course, the garden, right? So they go to a different location at night. And at some point, now you might see some mimesis, and this might throw you off in saying that any of this is historical, but he thinks that at that time they realize we can't receive him during the day. We have to capture him when the crowds aren't around and get him when he doesn't expect it. So that's when they get Jesus, and boom, you've got him caught. They get him on trial, and that's where they hand him over to the Roman Empire. What do you think about that kind of picture? I mean, none of that's provable. It's just, do you think that that it makes a lot of sense in the way that he's thinking about that?
No.
So what do you think makes sense?
Well, I just don't think that Mark or any of the gospel authors knew anything or about the circumstances of Jesus's crucifixion. I think they knew he was crucified. And I think that was really, Dom was one of my teachers, and we're friends. And he's a wonderful human being, and I learned a lot from him. He's a courageous and a creative thinker. But I think he would have to say this too is speculation, but it's based on certain information in the text. It's information that I don't trust as much as he would. That's all.
Thank you, Dennis, once again for such a great show.